Good morning. I'm Mike Ryan. I'm the Resources and Range Staff Officer on the Beaverhead-Deerlodge National Forest based out of Dillon, about 2 hours south of here, and it is my great pleasure this morning to moderate this panel. Our panel's topic is Camp Carolyn, a site of a small African-American mining community north of Homestake Pass. The land today is managed by the Beaverhead-Deerlodge National Forest and include
mic up to your mouth.
Pardon me. I'm not used to microphones. The first 20 years I was with the outfit, I had to talk over helicopters. So normally I just rely on my lung capacity.
Thank you.
Today, the site of the Brown and Flagg family homesteads are administered by the Beaverhead-Deerlodge National Forest. As far as we can tell, this is the only primarily Black mining community site on National Forest lands anywhere in the nation. For the past 2 summers, Forest Service archaeologists, University of Montana archaeology faculty, Montana State University's Ivan Doig Center have offered a summer field school investigating this important site to students of both universities and to train students in field methods used by federal archaeologists. Today's panelists will discuss what they've discovered at Camp Carolyn and how the interdisciplinary and inter-university approach to the site enhances scholarship and career opportunities. Today, you'll be hearing from Amy Schwartz, Forest Archaeologist and Heritage Program Manager for the Beaverhead-Deerlodge National Forest, Mary Rose Hicko, Master's Student in History at MSU, Kaylee Doherty, Bachelor's History Student at MSU, Alexandra Orr, Master's Alumni at University of Montana, Kristen Stedman, Master's Student in History at MSU, and presenting on behalf of Kelly Dixon will be Janet Orr, Director of the Ivan Doig Center at MSU. Following that, there will be a brief period for questions from the audience. So, Amy?
Oh, this is going to be challenging with this restraint right here. I'm used to throwing my hands up and getting all excited, so I'm sorry for the front row if I throw this at you guys. Yes, so this project really started back in December of 2020 when I first arrived on the BBRD, the Beaverhead-Deerlodge National Forest. Height of COVID time, so we're allowed in the office, and my supervisor here, he said, you know, why don't you just go through our database and see what interests you in there? Well, my background is actually African-American diasporic archaeology in the American West. I've worked on the Buffalo Soldiers at Fort Missoula, and I've helped Lori Wilkie with some of her books with the 10th Cavalry down in Texas. And so I get our database and I start looking for African-American sites. And lo and behold, other Forest Service archaeologists and probably archaeologists in this room will understand that our database is not coded as such yet. We are working on it, but it is not yet. And so I think, well, this is malarkey. We have African-American sites on this forest, where are they? And so I, you know, in the middle of all of the other projects that Mike's handing me, and then at midnight on newspapers.com, sponsor me someday, I go ahead and start researching African-Americans in Butte. Knowing that Butte, Montana, I'm from Phillipsburg, so I know Butte very well. Knowing that Butte is a melting pot of every ethnicity and diversity. And I think there had to be African-Americans here. I'm asking people around town, they're like, oh, maybe we saw a couple, we don't really know. Maybe, yeah, it sounds about right. So I look at newspapers.com and I start finding some newspapers. And I start finding out pretty early on that the Flaggs, who you will maybe hear about here, Charles Flagg and his wife, they came to Butte in 1880s. They were pretty successful there. They started the African-American Methodist Episcopal Methodist Church. They staked some claims up at Homestake, hence the name Homestake. A Black family actually named Homestake, despite what Places and Names of Montana says. Because that's, again, like, step to the side for a minute. That's what us archaeologists do. We are confirming, we are contradicting, or we are confirming. We're confirming it twice to history. It's very important to remember that. Kelly Dixon, who is my lifelong mentor, and sadly she could not be here today, she says that all the time. You know, otherwise historical archaeologists, we're just an expensive way to do your guys' job. I'm an expensive historian at that point because I have to go out and dig all of these little relics to find out about history. But what am I doing? I am confirming, contradicting, or contributing to history. And so we'll go on back there. So we're confirming that Homestake was actually named by Charles Flagg. So then fast forward to the 1892, here comes Richard Brown. And Richard Brown is this was actually his brother, Wallace Brown. We do not have a picture of Richard. He was actually a member of the 10th Cavalry, the Buffalo Soldiers. So then I start finding that connection and I start really getting emotional about this, you know. And then a little later on, I find out that these African Americans were actually working at owning, operating, and working up at Homestake. And then some of the businesses were actually owned by a female, Carolyn Van Horn, owner of the Blackwell mine. So we have a few different things up here. We have African American miners and we have a female-owned mine, all on the periphery of this Mecca mining center, right? And I need to look at my notes to make sure I'm staying on track here. So then I'm starting to get even more excited. We really have something here. And I bring it to Mike, and I'm pretty sure it's the last time he's going to say, hey, go back to project on your own. 2 years later, here we are, and I am now, yeah, we've got a lot going on. And so I'm like, gosh, I know for the Forest Service, we do not have time for this. How do we get this done? How do we make sure that we can do justice to this African-American mining site? And actually, so coinciding with this exact thing, we have Afro Outdoors going and talking at a congressional hearing, and they're saying, you know what, Forest Service, we don't have a place to recreate on the national land. We do not have a place of our own where we feel like we can be connected. And I'm like, oh, Stick, you do. Let's get this on the road, guys. Let's start bringing this in. And so, being a student of Kelly's, I immediately got a hold of her and I said, are you in? And are you interested? And she said, yes, hands down. So then Mike, through some of his college connections, actually at U of M, MSU has a professor there that he went to school with. And he says, you know what, I have a couple professors that you need to meet. And that's how we met Janet Orr. And it was crazy to me. Here we are, the rough and tumble archaeologists, like the cowboys of history, and we don't shower for weeks on end. We go live in the woods for longer than that, and I go to Janet, and she, without even asking any more questions, she says, yes, this needs work. We need to work on this. Let's get this partnership going. This photo here is one of the photos that I found in newspapers.com, sponsor me, that this is the Brown's homestead. We cannot find the original photo of this. It's lost. This is all we have. This grainy, ugly photo that people are gonna want the clear one. I do not have the clear one. This is it. When you look at it a little closer, it does look like there are some African Americans in the front row there. And then if we go to the next slide, yeah. Okay, yeah. This is prior to 1988 when it burned down. And so that's what we have. We just have those two photos and a spot on the landscape now. So we don't know where this building is. This is one that the mining museum brought up, and it's all we have. Yeah, so if anyone knows anything, let us know. All right. Oh yes, that's Kelly Dixon, and the most horrible picture of me. We keep on showing that photo. Yeah. Yeah, that's fun. All right. So then we get to why is this a big thing? Because I have to sell this to my leadership so that they are interested in allowing me to go rogue a little bit, right? Again, Forest Servicers in here, they understand, like, I got to really sell this. And so I go to them and I say, look, I think we can actually educate students on Forest Service jobs and practices. And with that, what else Mike and I have been doing is going to universities and helping students with USA jobs, because that thing is a nightmare. And so we go and we help these students fill out USA jobs. With our field school and our partnership, we are giving these students skills to then put on their resume and put into USA jobs so that they feel comfortable applying for these positions. We're also showing them how a lot of our students have been history students, and we're showing them how important archaeology is to contribute, contradict, or confirm things that they're going through. And then with that, with the field camp itself, the first summer it was 2 weeks. The second summer it was 2 1-week sessions. We're teaching students, and this is no news for archaeology students, we're teaching students how to live in a camp with each other and build a community in this little camp and still get work done, but yet build that little family, you know? And as a side there, when Mike and I were in school, one of the real founders of this, we had to do 8 weeks in British Columbia on our own dime. I'm still paying off one of those loans right now, you know, almost 20 years later. Great experience. Anything that I'm using right now? Nope, none of it. Because I knew I wanted to be a Forest Service archaeologist. And so with this, we're able to give students that avenue to put archaeology on their resumes to then apply for these archaeology positions. We're establishing partnerships. I don't know about, like, there's any other federal agencies in here and academics. We all know partnerships. That's what our leadership loves. They love that term, partnerships. And so I start throwing that thing around, and their leadership is like, done. You got this. I once got a bad evaluation because I didn't establish teamwork and partnerships. And to this day, I have no idea what that person was talking about because it's the only thing I'm actually really good at. Establishing partnerships. And then with that, it is establishing relationships too. Like there's that formal partnership, but then it's these relationships. And as you guys in the history world know, archaeology is the same way. It is such a small network of folks that those relationships are actually almost more valuable than the partnership. And then for other archaeologists and some historians will know, we part of our deal on National Forest land is we got to make some eligibility calls on our sites that are already established on the forest. We'll just bypass that one right now. Anyone wants to talk about it, let's talk about it later. Otherwise, my 5 minutes will be up soon. And then last, but absolutely not most, or least, is the documenting an African American site. As Mike said, there is not another one on the National Forest system that we know of. I have been searching for a little bit. We have African American sites on the National Forest. The Lolo has Sid, help me out here. The Fort Zula. No, oh gosh, up Rock Creek, I'm drawing up like Morgan Case Homestead, African American female. And then the Helena Lewis and Clark actually has Molly Ringgold, who was an African American female who owned a boarding house up on the hill, or up in Yogo Town. But as far as we know, we do not have the mining site. So then we fast forward a little bit to the fall of 2021, and I bring all of the professors out to the field, and we have a field day, and we start showing them what we actually have on the land, what we can get to, because the roads are pretty rough, and we actually did not have vehicles right for that day. Didn't even have to take folks to the actual site. They were involved. And then summer of 2022, we had the 2-week-long field school with roughly about 10 students, where that year we did the confirming on the land. We went up, we found the actual site. That site hadn't been visited since the 90s. We surveyed that whole entire area. There's a field next to it. I did not include a map yet, not that you guys are going to go loot these kinds of things. But if you want to know maps and stuff, let's just talk about that after and I can show you guys stuff there. And then we did the surface collection. As archaeologists know, we will go ahead and do that the basic surface collection, see what's going on top. Some of the artifacts that we have over here are actually from that surface collection. And then let's fast forward to this last summer of oh, what a fun group that was. We have had such good students. We really have, especially thinking that some of these are history students that have never gone 7 days without a shower. They did great. And then, you know, in this summer of 2023, we had the 2-week-long field sessions where it was a different set of students each week for the most part. And we actually got to do some of the actual excavations, which me being an archaeologist, I'm like, oh my God, more shovel testing, like that's the last thing I want to do. But come to find out the students absolutely loved it. And that's what the historians needed. They needed to see the dirt being dug up to bring up the past. We also had, because weather is crazy, so we never have a full schedule. Other forest servicers will know. The minute you make a schedule, it's going to change. So Mike and I kind of fly by the seat of our pants. So we set up an outdoor classroom that we then in the mornings, we did a morning briefing. And on rainy days and super cold days, which that first year it got so darn cold up there on Homestake, we had the students go over artifacts and actually diagnose what the artifact was to the best of their ability with our limited resources. The students nailed it. They did such a great job. And then we, went back out into the field once the weather cleared up, just like we would before service.
So I'm Mary Rose Keiko. I'm one of the master's students at Montana State in the history department. You're probably also going to have to tell me to raise the mic because I tend to talk with my hands and it might stray away from my mouth. But I have two things that I wanted to talk to you folks about today because I had the privilege of being the camp manager this summer. And so I was approached by Janet and by Amy around like end of February, early March. And they said, hey, you know, we really need somebody that's going to be able to do a lot of the logistics for us with the field school. So some of my really glamorous tasks, like I got to reserve porta potties for 2 weeks, which was so much fun. And now I know some of the people that work in the porta potty industry in Butte. They're really great people. So that was part of my job. But so much of what I did was, as Amy pointed out, with the 4 reasons why, was helping to establish that connection, right? Because I'm one of the people that was able to work between MSU as a student and a representative of MSU, but also to get to work with the forest. And later on, I did get to work the rest of my summer with Amy, which was a fantastic experience. But some of the things that I wanted to highlight, like some of the students that were in this year's field camp, and we also did get to actually know for certain using some LiDAR imaging of where the boarding house was, which is a fantastic experience for us. Because at least for my part with being the field camp manager, I was very much a student of archaeology, but also getting to help students figure out means of historical and archaeological research was super important, especially when we're all at this pivotal point where either we were recent graduates or we're current students. We're trying to figure out, what are we going to do professionally? We have no idea. Maybe we have some semblance of an idea. We like history, right? We like archaeology. Cool. How does this help us? So we can go to the next slide as well. A big part of establishing that connection, like Amy said, was being able to build the connections between the people at the field school in particular, because we're able to build connections that we're going to have for the rest of our lives. We're going to rely on each other as we go into our professional careers. It doesn't matter that I'm hoping to go into archaeology with the Forest Service, or that you know, Alexandra is going to do something with fiction and creative writing, and she's going to be fantastic at it. We're all going to be able to use these connections that we have with Montana State, University of Montana, and the Beaverhead-Deerlodge National Forest. So this is my favorite picture of Janet. Doing research in the rain. This is what we were doing up at Homestake, if you were curious what an average afternoon looked like after we were out in the field. Because you know, if you're familiar with Montana, and you're especially familiar with the divide, the weather's a little unpredictable. We definitely had some rainy afternoons, but this is what we were doing. And it was so fantastic to get to learn some very like on the ground research methods, especially for those of us that are students of history, because we haven't really run into how to do archaeological research. And I was very much a student of archaeology myself, even if I was trying to manage the field school at the same time. So some of the things that we were doing, like Amy mentioned, we got to dig test pits, which was fantastic. And we kind of got to hold that over the head of the participants of the previous field school because they didn't get to dig test pits. They only did surface research, and we were like, we got the really cool experience. And there's some of us getting to do just that, right? And so a big part of our afternoons, in particular, when it was raining and bitterly cold on summer afternoons, we got to actually research some of the physical artifacts that we have. And so this is one of my favorite pictures of us trying to discern what's happening with one of the test pits. But we do have some artifacts. We have this one here. Actually, we have all 3 that I have pictures of. So a lot of what we were able to do with our afternoons of research was discern the kind of society that was up at Camp Caroline, the kind of people that were passing by either in the boarding house or else staying up there full time. And so we were able to discern, like, we have these beautiful pieces of earthenware, especially this one's one of my favorites, and we have it here that has like this beautiful transfer print on it, but it even has like a bold metallic paint, and it says a lot about they were trying to project this upper class image per se. We even got to do a lot of research on maker's marks on earthenware and on glass as well, since we found a number of bottles. We even found a Mrs. Stewart's bluing laundry bottle, which was so cool. And something like this is what I'm still trying to work on myself with how do I research maker's marks. But it was a fantastic experience for us as students of archaeology to learn, okay, so we found this thing, literally, we dug this up today. How do we go back into the field camp, and how can we go through books? How can we, with very limited service, research ways to understand where this maker's mark came from and what kind of company this piece of pottery came from? What does that represent about the community? That was a big goal, and I think we were largely pretty successful at that. So with that being said, we'll move into more of the research methods.
Hi, I'm Kaylee. I'm going to be talking about my participation in Janet's undergraduate history class that helped compile some of the research on the Browns, Flaggs, and Camp Caroline, which then was used at the Camp Caroline Field School, and then also my participation in the second year of the Camp Caroline Field School. I think what was most important for me personally was just kind of learning how to apply research in a new way, both in Janet's undergraduate history class and also in the Camp Caroline Field School. Doing research on an active project is not something that undergraduates get to do really at all. I thought it was really important for undergraduates to be able to have the experience of not only learning how to research something that hadn't been really widely researched before, and then also kind of communicating and learning how to research together collaboratively. Undergraduate students also really are not asked to be collaborative very often. You have group presentations and you have group papers occasionally, but you're not really asked to work as a group towards a goal with the understanding that the research that you're compiling is going to be used in the future and is going to be continuously built off of. I think that was, it was really important just to kind of learn how to communicate and collaborate with one another, because you don't effectively communicate with one another right off the bat. It's really difficult, and so you have to kind of learn. And I think especially with kind of using the research methods and skills that I had previously built off of in my undergraduate, newspapers.com, ancestry.com, just understanding secondary and primary sources. It was really important to have a group that was able to help one another. You get stuck a lot. Researching is really frustrating. It is also very fun sometimes, but mostly frustrating, at least in my opinion, sometimes. But I think that it was just really important to be able to communicate. It's like, oh, how did you find this census record? I wasn't able to find that. It was just really collaborative. You don't get to really do that as a history undergraduate, which I think is something that's kind of missed, because history is collaborative. You're constantly building off each other's work, or you're contradicting something, or you are creating something new, kind of like archaeology, 3 C's. And so I just thought that was a really valuable experience. We kind of, it was definitely really difficult also. Janet emphasized that we were supposed to organize from the bottom up, which was also a learning curve for undergraduates, but a really great experience. I think that it was really important that we were all able to kind of have our own individual kind of projects within the Browns, Flaggs, and Camp Caroline research. Some of us focused on African-American communities in the West as a whole. Some of us, like myself, focused on the African-American community in Butte at the same time that the Browns and Flaggs were there. And then some of us focused specifically on the Browns and Flaggs and Camp Caroline. And I just felt that was really important for all of us to kind of be participating in each other's research, but then also able to have our own just kind of little niche, I guess, and then to see it all laid out at Camp Caroline. I think also kind of having that experience of collaborating with one another and learning how to communicate and build off each other's work was really important at Camp Caroline as well, because that's what we were doing. We were learning how to be archaeologists together and learning new research methods, in addition to kind of incorporating our history, fiction, and archaeobotany. I think that was one of them. It was really interesting. It was definitely a learning curve for me to kind of empathize and imagine physical objects in a landscape in history the same way that I try to empathize and imagine the lives of the people I'm researching. It was difficult. Researching objects was kind of a lot. I couldn't really understand maker's marks. It's just kind of, I would get frustrated, but then I just talked to the people around me and we would figure it out. And that was what was most important when I took away from that. It was also really important for me to kind of learn how to kind of acknowledge the history of objects themselves and then also put them within the context of the history of the Browns and Flaggs and the environment of Camp Caroline, which kind of completely changed my perspective on history and historic research. It was really important to be able to just kind of paint a broader picture and learn how to analyze a physical landscape and physical objects and see how these objects could and did play into the lives of the people who were at the boarding house and the Browns and Flaggs and just what life was like in Homestake and at Camp Caroline. I found this piece of porcelain. I was really excited about it. We had just kind of learned the difference between earthenware and porcelain in camp that day. And then I found this piece of porcelain. And at the end of the week, we were asked to kind of choose an object and do some research on it. And I couldn't find anything about this piece of porcelain. It drove me up the wall. I could not understand it. It was so frustrating. There's no maker's mark. I could tell there were two distinct pieces based on the curvature. So one of the patterns was kind of like curved into the piece. It was kind of curved up into a U, and the other was curved out and was on the outside. I like to picture it as a teacup and saucer, just because that's kind of what I like to picture being at the boarding house. And then maybe someone broke it and someone's really mad. Just like that little domestic image. And then I couldn't find this piece of porcelain. We had these presentations. I had to kind of just be like, I don't really know. I'm not able to figure this out. And then we all kind of talked about it and talked about how this piece of porcelain could kind of contribute to our image of the Browns and Flaggs and the lives they had, what they were trying to portray in their lives and what they valued as domestic objects. Everyone likes pretty things, I think. So it's just kind of nice to see that reflected in the lives of the Browns and Flaggs. And then actually the weekend after the field school, I was home and then I was at a walking tour at the Extreme History Project, and I see that exact same pattern of porcelain, and I run over there, and then I ask Crystal, who's laughing. I'm like, what is this? Tell me everything, please. I've been just dying. I've been seeing this pattern of porcelain just when I close my eyes, I can't escape it. And it was Japanese Phoenix pattern porcelain, which was actually a really common export at the time that the Browns and Flaggs were at Camp Caroline and were at the boarding house and living there and running it, which was just a really fantastic illustration of just how archaeology and history kind of combined for me in my research methods, and just kind of how I was able to kind of carry that outside of Camp Caroline, the field school and the experience I had there. I think that both history and archaeology obviously work with each other and off of each other, but I think they work especially well when they're actively communicating with one another together and we're all collaborating and having discussions, because I think, especially in my experience as a history undergraduate, I don't really get to have too many discussions like that with my peers where it's like, what is going on? I'm so confused. But it was really, I just thought it was really useful. So it was just really fantastic for me to have that opportunity to just see history and archaeology working and communicating with one another actively.
Hello, my name is Alexandra, and I'm here to kind of talk about how the implications of this field camp for interdisciplinary collaboration, not just between history and archaeology, but between history, archaeology, and also the arts. So I have an undergrad degree in religious studies, which is essentially history, but I recently graduated with an MFA in fiction. So I come from an artistic background, and I write regional Western fiction, which is why I'm interested in the Western landscape, especially Montana. And I took part in the Camp Caroline field camp the first summer, both weeks, and the second summer, 1 week. So I've done 3 weeks up there. And so because of my more eclectic background, I always kind of felt like I couldn't contribute much of value to the process of reconstructing the Browns' lives at Homestake. During the 2022 camp, I produced a written narrative summary of our research about the Browns, which was a good chance to use my experience as a narrative writer. But up until recently, I really felt like this wasn't a quality contribution to the group, especially compared to the research and archaeology skills of the MSU and Forest Service members of the camp. As essentially an artist, I felt that my field was far too nebulous and subjective to actually help the historian reconstruct the past and think about historic sites. But by the 2023 camp, I started to realize the value of this hugely interdisciplinary group of people. And I think that history, fiction, and archaeology can actually work together to better evoke the past for a modern reader, and that these fields are not as disparate as one might think. You know, traditionally we view arts, history, archaeology as completely antithetical to each other. But I think that each brings skills to the table that make history accessible to a modern reader. So the ultimate goal of history, fiction, and archaeology, right, is to produce a narrative of the past. A narrative, right, is a spoken or written account of connected events. I would take that one step farther and say that a narrative focuses on a singular figure at its heart. And that could be a character, a site, a family like the Browns, an animal, a time period, and then each narrative moves forward towards some kind of conclusion. And I think, of course, a historian would be intimately familiar with a narrative moving forward to some kind of ending. That is the sweep of time. And so in fiction, the process is different. The narrative reveals itself through the lived experiences and things that the writer has absorbed from the world, who then produces a narrative based on that. And of course, fiction has access, right, to a whole variety of creative elements that the other fields don't, like dialogue or access to internal monologue or something like that. But I think the most important and relevant tool that fiction has to produce strong narratives is precise, strong descriptive writing, especially writing that focuses on materiality. So of course, during historical writing, the narrative reveals itself through the primary and secondary sources that the historian gathers. The sweep of time, again, that constitutes a historical narrative that the historian then synthesizes and produces in a written product. So of course, an archaeologist, somewhat similar process, reconstructs the narrative of a site using the physicality of place and human occupation to reconstruct a narrative about the people who lived in the past. So for example, our discovery of cut cattle bones at Camp Carolyn, right, implies that the Browns ate and served beef at their boarding house. That's like a piece of evidence that contributes to a narrative. Despite the differences in method, all these disciplines use raw input, whether that's like research, experience, artifacts, newspapers.com, to output a coherent narrative at the end of this process, generally in the form of a written piece. And I think that a critical and often forgotten, even in fiction, part of a narrative is a sense of materiality. I see materiality as a broad term that encompasses the setting, so where the narrative takes place, so Homestake, and physicality. So this would be the appearance and feeling of the objects and people that move throughout the narrative. A writer, uses strong sensory detail to evoke this materiality. So an example would be a detailed description of the smell of the coconut cake that the Browns' boarding house was known for. That constitutes a material detail. That's materiality in writing. A narrative divorced from materiality fails. A narrative without any materiality comes across as ungrounded and empty, kind of like a play that takes place just on an empty stage. The reader is being denied very critical information about the world where this narrative takes place if there is no materiality. And a reader, especially a reader of history, needs to understand the wider world apart from the central thesis in order to grasp the importance of the narrative itself. I think a narrative without material detail is a little bit like a piece of historical writing that omits critical historical context of the wider time period. You're missing information. So any narrative about the Browns would be incomplete without a description of the site itself and the artifacts that the Browns interacted with there. It would be incomplete, without a description of the landscape, of the rock spires of the Butte Batholith, the meadow where the boarding house stood, where strawberries used to grow. It doesn't really matter if a writer of a narrative history can say, I know where Spire Rock is on a map, right? What matters is if they can describe the grass around the base of the rock, the crunch of the elk droppings as we hiked up it last summer, the smell of the yarrow being crushed underfoot. Those are material details that populate a narrative with important information that the reader needs to know. Those details make history not an abstract concept, but an accessible space that the reader can inhabit. And all of those details constitute materiality. So, strong history must use the skills of archaeology and fiction to describe these material details. Archaeology is the process of gathering materiality. I think writers and historians can often get a little lost and divorced from the material world, which is, I think, the value of a camp like this. Like, you go out at the site and experience the environment where this history took place. The process of archaeology is incredibly important because the archaeologist can discover and place into context, right, the cattle bones that she finds at the dig. The historian can research beef recipes from the early 20th century and what the presence of cattle and beef eating at the site implies about class or race during the time period. And the fiction writer can contribute the exact color of the bones when we took them out of the ground and the smell of the cooking beef as hungry miners ate it at the Browns' table. Those are all the different disciplines' contributions to material detail. And these details aren't just random imaginative embellishments that you place in a piece of writing to fluff it up. They reveal a wealth of detail about the historical context of the time period. Each artifact or material object, and of course an archaeologist can attest to this, has its own narrative that demonstrates the social rules and preoccupations of the time. So what dinners did the Browns potentially make with this beef? Who ate this food? Where in the structure did they maybe sit when they ate it? So history and archaeology are the fields who can give us potential answers to some of these questions through research and excavation. But descriptive writing, strong material writing, will make these details real and important in the mind of the reader. So I think Camp Carolyn really demonstrated to me, and I hope interdisciplinary camps like this will go on to demonstrate the value of having people not only from history and archaeology, but from the arts involved in the process of history making. And this process isn't about letting go of objectivity or writing full-on historical fiction. That's a far different field. It's about filling historic writing with the material detail that makes it compelling to a reader and strengthens the narrative itself. So I think our field camps at Camp Carolyn were an excellent exercise in how scholars from the arts, humanities, and the sciences can work together instead of seeing each other's fields as antithetical. I do think that my fiction-based ability to think in terms of narrative and imagery did enable me to produce a coherent initial narrative of the Browns. And I think most importantly, I think all of us who participated in this camp have walked away with a far richer view of what history is and can be in the future. Of course, I think that this process of materiality is about making the past accessible, just like Kaylee's, imagining the broken cup and someone getting angry about it. Like, that isn't just random imagination. That is the power of making the past a place that we can all inhabit and think about. And I think the key to that is interdisciplinary endeavors like this that address the actual process of writing history. Thank you.
Right, I don't know how I'm gonna follow that, but thanks, Alexandra. So I have the great fortune and privilege of compiling all the research and data that you have heard about today into a master's thesis. I was approached by Janet when I was looking at my grad school kind of research, and she said, we have an African-American mining site up on Homestake Pass. And I think that your research, which my undergrad was focused on Black women in the West, specifically, in Montana and Colorado. And she was like, I think this will be perfect for you. So I got to go to the field school this summer, and it really established kind of what Alexander was talking about, the importance of place-based learning. As a student who was an undergrad during COVID, I did not get to enjoy going to the archives and interacting with people. So getting to do an interdisciplinary field school really helped set me up for my graduate master's thesis. What I'm going to talk to you about today, though, is putting the Brown family into the larger African-American diasporic context, specifically talking about Booker T. Washington and Black exceptionalism. So kind of in this period where we see the Browns coming over into Butte from Virginia, Booker T. Washington, W.E. Du Bois are talking about Black exceptionalism. What does this mean? Well, Booker T. Washington has a book called Up From Slavery that essentially wants people that were enslaved to use the tools that were forced upon them in enslavement to then make their own sustainable communities, be that agriculture, mining, housekeeping, what have you. One of my favorite quotes that I got to use in my undergrad thesis is from Robert Knox, and he talks about the African Americans deserve to have peace and happiness by their own fireside, enjoying the toils of their daily labor. And I think that the Browns absolutely embody this, especially the women. In my research, I found that Richard, who we've talked about, and Wallace, their mother came over with her two daughters, younger daughters, and they ran the boarding house. And in this, you also see this refinement period in the late Victorian, early Edwardian period, where white women specifically were in this, like, we need to better ourselves, we need to be in book clubs and social clubs and really progress ourselves. Whereas Black women were seen as inferior, antithetical to white women. So what did they do? They formed their own clubs and they did the exact same thing. And we see in the family that is the Browns, that is still up and alive in Homestake today, that this was passed on to their children and grandchildren of bettering themselves, investing in their communities. And this one is a article from the Montana Standard 1965. And this is a full page, I think this is a front page of Homestake and of the Brown family. So they really invested in the community at Homestake and then the community of Butte proper. And I think it's made a lasting contribution. I will say that my work, even though this has been a multi-year project, is in its infancy. So I'm really hoping to work on this in the next year and present something a little bit more cohesive. But I do want to talk about, again, that this is the first site of its kind on the forest, and it needs to be shared with the local community and then the national community. Again, my forthcoming writing wouldn't be possible without the research done before me by Kaylee and her class, Janet, Amy, but I don't intend to let this research stay within my hands. As a white woman, I do not have the perspective as an African-American woman would, and I believe that the Black community should be able to praise and enjoy this site, as Amy had said with Afro Outdoors, that they have a place that they can call home. I picture a African-American school child who can read about the Browns in their American West history. And if there's, a course on Montana that they can read about the Browns, they can read about these women who came over and established this boarding house in this African-American community. So I do look forward to synthesizing this work. Hopefully we'll share a more cohesive one soon. But I am very proud to be a part of this project and very thankful to Amy for entrusting me about writing it.
First of all, my compliments to the panelists. We had impressed upon them the time limitations and look how well they did. Okay, one thing that comes across from their presentations is the importance of imagination in doing historical and archaeological research. And I'm going to ask you to call on that now, because I am Janet Orr, I'm not Kelly Dixon. So I want you to imagine that I'm this young, dynamic expert on the African-American archaeology of the West, and that you're seeing this animated demonstration of her expertise. So these are her comments that she prepared. She wants to congratulate the group for earning a Regional Foresters Honor Award for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion from the Regional Division of the Forest Service, which Amy and Mike can talk about more. This notifies that they were selected for seeking the most equitable and inclusive interpretation of the diverse history of underrepresented groups on the National Forest lands. And she says this is the only site or district of its kind among all the national forests in the USA. So this site is not only rare and significant because of the status in the USF system, but is also significant to archaeology of the African diaspora. It shows the importance of the site and the project and the ability to reveal often untold stories of African Americans in the West. Scholars are doing surveys of community archaeology of the African diaspora, and they're drawing attention to the ways in which material evidence of marginalized and forgotten communities can be used with archival and oral sources to achieve greater recognition of multi-ethnic and multiracial histories. The Homestake Pass project panelists here are demonstrating their journey toward helping with such recognition. We'll return to those pictures. What she has produced here, what Kelly has produced here, Professor Dixon, is the context for the Homestake Pass Camp Caroline project. This shows that there's a lot of work being carried out. The number of formal archaeological studies of places connected with African American heritage in the American West, and it still seems small compared to the size of the land and compared to the studies of African American heritage elsewhere in the U.S. Considering this and realizing how rare it is to have such equally rich historical and archaeological records, these places near Homestake are even more precious. The panelists call attention to how this project has also provided a federal archaeology immersion experience so the students could have a training ground for federal employment. By default, everyone also had firsthand experience with the benefits of interdisciplinary research. This is an example of scholarship that breaks down disciplinary boundaries, and Kaylee shared how she appreciated the collaborative space shared by the different teams on the field school when everyone would reconnect at the end of each workday to compare notes on the day's findings. Kaylee compared this sense of cohesion with her experience with public history. Indeed, archaeological field work is based on teamwork, and the team appears to have found common ground and blurred the lines between public history and public archaeology. The Camp Caroline is associated then with broader events in U.S. history, including the post-Reconstruction era and the effects of Booker T. Washington and movements to have African Americans create their own sustainable communities. The panelists draw attention to women as community builders, inspiring us to think all about the engendered signatures that surely made up the cultural landscape of the Camp Caroline area. And I might add that one of the significances of this site is the persistence of an African American community, as the Brown family still retains ownership of the mining claim and still has descendants living in Butte. But how to tease out such signatures, share lessons of social history, and tell compelling stories? Alexander provided some ideas, making good points about how fiction, history, and archaeology all use narrative. Alexander's suggestion to consider place as helping to create more compelling narratives is astute, and even more poignant when we consider that the archaeological traces of Camp Caroline community are still situated in their places of deposition out on the land. When done correctly, archaeology provides a narrative in which stories and identities can evolve. I look forward to the stories and lessons Alexandra draws from the people, places, and things comprising this project. Lastly, she says, this work overall underscores the power of archaeology, history, and heritage management to serve as a vehicle for social justice. It is an honor to be involved with this team working to document and protect what is left of this Homestake Pass community. Thank you for the opportunity to be involved, Kelly Dixon.
I had one story that I wanted to share. If you could show the Hiawatha Brown image one more time.
We'll go back to those because we went through.
Perfect, yeah. So as you know, the 3 C's, we're confirming, contradicting, or contributing, right? Well, Mary Rose and I actually went and spoke back in August at the B'nai Israel Cultural Center in Butte on this project. And I'm up there yabbering on about what we do and what I do and what the students have done. And oh yeah, we actually, we confirmed that Randy Brown is alive. Here I am. And like crickets for a minute. And I probably turned beet red. And I was like, we confirmed you're alive, sir. And he was like, yeah, we did. Yeah, I'm right here. And I said, I've been trying to get a hold of you for 2 years. And I have been. And he says, yeah, I'm old and I don't know how to work the phone. And well, you got to email me. So I have your email. Well, we'll get that to you. So he actually was able to give us some of the photos. But one other thing that he did, some of the records that we were going through at the archives that first year when it was snowing at Homestake, we found out that Hiawatha Brown, who was the very first African miner in underground Butte. That's huge. 1944 was the very first time an African-American miner was allowed in underground Butte. Racism, structuralized racism, blatant racism. Yeah, we got all that going on. Because he was good at football, and he was good at football probably because he ran from Whitehall up to Homestake every day to get to school and back home because they lived in both places and school was in one. He actually was a very good football player, and then he went on to coach track. And the miners knew that. They're like, let's invite that guy underground. He's a pretty good miner. He'll probably be a pretty good miner because he's a good football player and we like to watch him. So bring him under. And so he did. Well, he later died at Berkeley Pit. I was not prepared for this, so I do not know the details of it. However, what it looked like in the records is that he died from heart troubles. Well, talking to Randy, that was structuralized racism. He died from more than just heart troubles. We don't know exactly what it was, but there was foul play. Kind of a downer on a moment, but here you go, Mike.
Well, thank you for that, Sarah.
Yeah. He's so used to it.
Janet mentioned it, but very briefly, I do want to formally announce it was supposed to be a surprise to them, but on Monday, our regional forester, Leanne Martin, selected Amy, Janet, and our missing cadre member, Kelly Dixon, for this year's Regional Foresters Award for Diversity and Inclusion for their tireless work on the Homestake Pass area. We're very proud of them.